My parents faked medical emergencies and manipulated my sister's health to keep me sending them money for years. But then I uncovered their darkest secrets and used them to destroy their control over me. The moment I announced I was quitting my six-figure finance job to start a graphic design business, my mother's face went completely pale. She clutched her chest like she was having a heart attack. The thing was, she kept peeking at me through her fingers to see if I was buying the act. And when she realized I wasn't rushing to her side, she miraculously recovered just enough to scream about how I was tearing our family apart. For 6 years, I'd been handing over $800 a month because my parents always seemed to be in some sort of crisis. Thing is, they own their own auto repair shop, eat out at pricey restaurants every week, and just bought a brand new SUV. It never made sense. I'd been their personal ATM since college graduation because they convinced me I owed them for every sacrifice they ever made. But watching my mom's award-worthy meltdown over my job change finally made something click. The next week, I cut their monthly allowance in half just to test the waters, and suddenly my mother needed urgent care, twice. She called me sobbing from waiting rooms, talking about chest pains and unaffordable copays. But every time I showed up, she was on her phone, scrolling through Facebook, until she spotted me. Then the gasping and clutching would start. My girlfriend Talia was the one who helped me truly see what was happening. She'd been quietly observing for 3 years and had never once seen my parents genuinely struggle. Their emergencies always coincided with their wants, not their needs. So I started digging, and what I found made me sick. The same week my mom claimed they couldn't afford groceries, I found a receipt in her purse for a $200 dinner at a steakhouse. When my dad begged for money to fix the shop's van, I found a Facebook post where he was bragging about his expensive new tool set. But the real blow came when I cornered my younger sister Leela alone, and she completely broke down. Through tears, she admitted that our parents had been coaching her for years on what to say to guilt-trip me. Before every family gathering, they'd sit her down and feed her lines about how badly they needed my help, how I was the responsible one, how terrified they were about money. The most painful part? Leela's entire college fund had already been fully covered. Meanwhile, they were telling me they needed money to help her get through school. I'd been working overtime, pouring money into their lifestyle while they protected their golden child from any real-world responsibility. When I confronted them with hard evidence of their lies, my mom put on the performance of a lifetime. She collapsed on the kitchen floor, wheezing that my accusations were going to kill her. But I caught her peeking again, watching for my reaction. And when I didn't call 911, she suddenly found the strength to leap to her feet and scream about how ungrateful I was. That's when my dad dropped the mask. He exploded, yelling that I owed them everything, that they made me who I was, and that successful kids are supposed to support their parents. The moment I told them I was cutting off all support, my mother called Leela in hysterics. She claimed I was having a breakdown, destroying our family, and begged her to talk some sense into me. She used Leela's fear of her episodes to manipulate her, and by extension, try to control me. The next month was absolute hell. They escalated everything. My mom started showing up at my office mid-breakdown, forcing me to leave important meetings. My dad began calling Talia directly, saying I was mentally unwell and needed intervention. They even threatened to kick Leela out of the house unless I went back to being their cash cow. That sent her into a panic. She was finishing her senior year and had nowhere else to go. Last week, my mother called an actual ambulance during one of her staged episodes. But when the paramedics arrived, she magically recovered and claimed she was just overwhelmed because her son had abandoned the family. When the confused paramedic asked if this had happened before, she got defensive and snapped that they wouldn't understand family dynamics. I stood my ground, and I let Leela move in with me.
One morning, she left a voicemail saying she was dying in the hospital, but when Leela called to check, the staff confirmed no one by our mother's name had been admitted. We stared at over 47 missed calls from the past 2 hours, each one describing a new, life-threatening emergency. Leela turned to me with this hollow, worn-out look and asked, "Are we really just going to keep letting them destroy us like this?" The next morning, I woke up to a call from building security. My mother was in the lobby, claiming chest pains and saying she needed her son right away. The guard looked deeply uncomfortable as she clutched the desk and moaned dramatically, but between gasps, she kept glancing down at her phone. When I came downstairs, she straightened immediately and launched into a speech about how I was killing her with stress. I walked right past her, toward the exit. She followed, grabbing at my sleeve, stumbling theatrically as other residents watched. She wailed about being abandoned, her cries echoing through the hallway, but I didn't stop. When we reached the parking garage, she dropped the act in an instant. Her face hardened with fury. She hissed threats about ruining my reputation, about turning the entire family against me. That afternoon, Leela showed me a series of texts from our parents. They were telling her exactly what to say to guilt-trip me, complete with word-for-word lines about family loyalty and how scared she was of losing her home. The messages went back years. Some even documented rehearsal sessions where they'd practice her emotional breakdowns together. My father started waiting outside my office building during lunch, positioning himself near the main doors and approaching my coworkers. He told them stories about his ungrateful son who had abandoned his family. Eventually, security had to intervene when he started following people to their cars, begging them to convince me to do the right thing. Things escalated even more when my mother befriended my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Morales. She began visiting her daily, sobbing about her heartless son while offering to carry groceries. Before long, Mrs. Morales started giving me disapproving stares in the hallway. I overheard her one evening telling another neighbor about the poor woman whose son had left her to suffer alone. Talia discovered my parents had been calling her workplace. They claimed I was in the middle of a mental breakdown and needed intervention. Her boss pulled her aside to express concern, even suggesting she might want to reconsider being with someone so unstable. My parents had found her LinkedIn and were contacting her professional network one connection at a time. One evening, Leela broke down. She showed me a video our mother had sent her. In it, she lay in bed looking deathly pale, whispering that she might not make it through the night if her family didn't come to her. But in the background, we could clearly hear our dad laughing at something on the TV, perfectly relaxed. The entire video was a staged performance. Then they started showing up at the homes of Leela's friends. They told the parents we were in the middle of a family emergency, painting me as mentally unstable and potentially dangerous. A few of Leela's friends' parents actually called her, concerned for her safety, offering her places to stay, just in case. The financial manipulation took a darker turn. My mother began maxing out credit cards, then sent me photos of overdue notices saying they were about to lose the house. But Leela found receipts in her car for thousands spent on jewelry the same week Mom claimed they couldn't afford food. My father began reaching out to my former coworkers from the finance job. He told them quitting had broken me mentally and begged them to offer me my old job back, claimed it was the only way to save me. Some of them contacted me, confused and disturbed, because what he told them didn't match anything they knew about me. Then came the moment that changed everything. While helping Leela pack the last of her things from our parents' house, I found a folder tucked away in a dusty bin in the garage. Inside were bank statements showing a sizable inheritance from our grandmother, money they never told us about. They'd been living off that for years while bleeding me dry. The statements detailed systematic transfers to investment portfolios, vacation accounts, and luxury purchases, spanning back nearly a decade. The same months they'd cried about medical bills and mortgage payments, they were booking resorts and buying high-end watches.
The same bank statements that demanded my money also showed large deposits from the hidden inheritance. Leela stared at the documents in disbelief, slowly grasping the full scale of the betrayal. Our grandmother had left that money for our education, for our futures, but our parents had taken every penny. They had even forged papers to make it look like the inheritance was tiny and already spent on family expenses. When Mom realized we'd stopped reacting to her manufactured emergencies, her performances only intensified. She began calling extended relatives, spinning stories about being the victim of elder abuse. Cousins I hadn't heard from in years started reaching out, disturbed by tales of how I was supposedly destroying our parents during their golden years. The final straw came when she staged a fall in a grocery store. She claimed the stress of being abandoned had made her dizzy. But when store security reviewed the footage, it clearly showed her carefully arranging herself before lowering gently to the floor. When confronted, she bolted from the store, later insisting I had orchestrated the entire incident to publicly humiliate her. My father's mask finally shattered at a family event we couldn't avoid. In front of everyone, he went on a tirade about how ungrateful children owed everything to their parents. He declared that kids existed to serve their parents and that every bit of my success was rightfully theirs. He even calculated imaginary debts I supposedly owed for being raised, itemizing years of food, clothing, and shelter as if I were a bad investment. My mother tried to stop him, realizing too late that he was exposing their entire scheme, but the damage had already been done. Family members sat in stunned silence. Then the questions started. People began to doubt the stories they had heard about me. Leela found her voice. She stood up and told everyone how our parents had coached her for years, drilling guilt trips into her until she could recite them like scripts. She showed them the messages, rehearsals, breakdown lines, emotional manipulation outlined like a play. The room was dead silent as the truth came out. Years of lies, cruelty, and control were laid bare. My mother made one last attempt at drama. She grabbed her chest, gasped about the stress of being betrayed, and staggered toward the door. But no one moved, no one rushed to help. And when she realized the show wasn't landing, she straightened up and stormed out. My father followed, fuming. In the days that followed, more stories emerged. Relatives came forward with their own accounts, loans that had never been repaid, emotional blackmail during emergencies, schemes that had been running for decades. My parents had been manipulating others too, though never to the extent they did to me. Through it all, Talia never left my side. She helped me recognize that none of this was my fault. She came from a healthy, functional family, and her perspective helped me see just how toxic mine truly was. Her parents were horrified by what we had endured and offered support without hesitation. In fact, their kindness became a lifeline. They began inviting Leela and me to dinner regularly, giving us a glimpse into the kind of family we never had. One night, Talia's mother pulled me aside and quietly handed me a business card. It was for a therapist who specialized in family trauma. I thanked her and tucked it into my wallet, not quite ready to take that step, but not dismissing it either. Meanwhile, our parents' behavior grew more desperate and more erratic. They started driving past my building at odd hours, leaving handwritten notes on my windshield. The messages bounced between threats and desperate pleas. One morning, I found all 4 of my car tires deflated. I couldn't prove it was them, but the building security footage showed nothing. The blind spot they used had somehow been found. Leela began having nightmares about our mother's fake medical crises. She'd wake up choking back sobs, convinced that this time it was real. I'd catch her checking her phone over and over, terrified of missing a true emergency buried in all the false alarms. The psychological toll was heavier than either of us had realized. Then it escalated again. At work, I was called into a meeting by my manager. Apparently, my father had created a fake LinkedIn account, pretending to be a concerned family friend. He'd been messaging my coworkers, warning them about my declining mental health and urging the company to intervene. I was mortified, but prepared. I'd already begun building a case, a growing file of evidence documenting every manipulation. Screenshots of texts, bank records showing luxury purchases made while they claimed poverty, video clips, receipts, and messages that told the real story. The file was getting thicker by the day as their control slipped further and they grasped at more unhinged ways to pull me back in.
Then it intensified. I wasn't prepared for my mother's next move. At a local charity event, she met the mother of one of my most valuable clients, purely by chance, and discovered the connection to me. Within days, she had poisoned the relationship, weaving stories about my supposed instability and unreliability. The client called me, expressing hesitation about continuing our contract. Around the same time, Talia intercepted a package addressed to me at her apartment, where I'd been staying more often to avoid my parents' stalking. Inside were old childhood photos, each with manipulative notes scrawled on the back. They outlined every supposed sacrifice my parents had made and calculated the emotional debt I supposedly owed. A few photos had been altered, my face literally scratched out. The harassment spread to social media. My parents created multiple fake accounts and began leaving malicious comments on my business pages. They posted reviews hinting that I was unstable and couldn't be trusted. They infiltrated local community groups, warning residents about doing business with someone who abandons his own family. Every post was crafted just carefully enough to evade legal defamation, but they knew the damage they were doing. Then Leela made another disturbing discovery. Our parents had been accessing her email. Years ago, they'd insisted on knowing her password for emergencies. They'd been monitoring our conversations, tracking our movements, gathering ammunition. We spent an entire night securing everything, changing passwords, double verifying devices, locking down accounts we hadn't realized were compromised. My mother's public performances escalated. She began showing up at restaurants where she knew I had business meetings, collapsing near my table, clutching her chest. The first time, I actually stood up in alarm. But when it happened 3 times in 2 weeks, each one perfectly timed, I saw the pattern. The deeper we dug into the finances, the worse it got. We discovered our parents had opened credit cards in my name years ago. They used them sparingly enough to avoid raising red flags, but steadily built up debt they could eventually use against me. When I tried disputing the accounts, they provided forged documents, papers that falsely claimed I had given them authority over my finances while I was in college. Meanwhile, my father's behavior was growing more aggressive. He began following Talia to the gym. He'd sit in his car in the parking lot, waiting for her to leave. Sometimes he'd beg her, teary-eyed, to help fix the family. Other times he'd rage, accusing her of turning me against them. After several complaints from members, the gym finally banned him from the premises. Relatives started coming forward with their own horror stories. My aunt confessed that years ago, our parents had borrowed $30,000 for a medical emergency, money they never paid back, despite their secret wealth. My uncle told us how they manipulated him into co-signing a loan, which they later defaulted on, destroying his credit in the process. Then Leela found even more damning evidence. Buried in a filing cabinet were insurance policies we never knew existed, investment accounts opened in our names that they controlled, even a lease for a storage unit. When we checked it out, we found it filled with luxury items, high-end electronics, jewelry, designer clothing, all purchased during the very same periods they claimed to be broke. The deception felt endless. And then came one of the most surreal moments of all. My mother hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on me, but she made a poor choice. The investigator sensed something was off and ended up contacting me directly. He refunded her payment and even gave me recordings of their conversations, evidence of her intent to discredit me through any means possible. Work became harder and harder to manage. My parents learned where I usually stopped for coffee before meetings and started showing up there. My mother would plant herself where clients could see her, crying loudly and talking to anyone who'd listen about how her son had abandoned her. The awkward tension she created started to affect my professional relationships. Meanwhile, Leela's mental health began to unravel. The stress overwhelmed her. Every time her phone rang, she froze, her breath catching. She couldn't tell anymore if it was a real emergency or another manipulation. One night, I found her sitting on the bathroom floor staring at her hands. She'd thrown her phone in the toilet just to stop the constant flood of messages. Then, they tried to weaponize the holidays. They sent out mass messages to our entire extended family announcing they were canceling Thanksgiving. They claimed their sons had destroyed their will to live. Attached were photos of a table set for 4, our names on place cards, plates untouched. The implication was clear. It was a carefully staged scene of abandonment. Some relatives saw through it, others didn't.
Talia's employer finally had enough. After weeks of enduring my parents' harassment, calls, emails, underhanded attempts to ruin her professional reputation, they sent a formal cease and desist letter. They documented every incident, every manipulation. My father responded by showing up at their office in person, accusing the company of enabling elder abuse by supporting my relationship with their daughter. But for Lila, the breaking point came when our parents contacted her academic advisor. They claimed she was living in an unsafe environment with an unstable brother. They shared heavily edited text messages and selectively cropped emails to paint a distorted picture of danger. The university launched an investigation. Lila was terrified her academic standing, her future, was on the line. I hired a lawyer who sent a cease and desist letter on our behalf. I knew it wouldn't stop them, and I was right. My mother responded by collapsing in the lobby of the law firm, claiming her son's legal threats were killing her. The firm's security footage later showed her calmly checking her makeup in the elevator before launching into the scene. Meanwhile, my business took another hit as their sabotage campaign escalated. They created fake social media pages with names nearly identical to mine and began messaging potential clients directly. Each message warned of my instability and unreliability. They even fabricated testimonials from imaginary former clients detailing dramatic horror stories. Every post, every message, carefully calculated to inflict the most damage without crossing the line into blatant illegality. Then came the final revelation in the investigation into our grandmother's estate. Not only had our parents hidden the inheritance, they had also coerced her into changing her will during her last vulnerable years. The original version, which we found a copy of tucked in an old filing box, had divided everything equally among her grandchildren. The amended version handed full control to our parents. Lila and I spent night after night piecing together the timeline. Every crisis in the family had aligned with some major purchase or indulgent vacation. Sudden car trouble? That was the same week they bought a new home theater system. Medical emergency? A luxury watch showed up in their collection. In hindsight, the pattern was glaring. It was painful to realize just how long it had been right in front of us. My mother's public theatrics became increasingly ridiculous. She started wearing a medical alert bracelet and would trigger false alarms in public whenever she spotted me nearby. More than once, emergency services were dispatched to the scene, only for paramedics to realize it was her again. By the third incident, they began recognizing her and quietly documenting the abuse of their time and resources. The toll on my mental health was intense. I found myself constantly checking locks, installing extra security cameras, even altering my daily routines to avoid patterns they might track. I was exhausted, worn thin by hypervigilance. Eventually, at Talia's gentle urging, I made an appointment with the trauma therapist whose card her mother had given me. I knew I couldn't go on like this. But my father hadn't stopped. He started joining professional organizations in my industry, using his real name but posing as someone interested in the field. At networking events, he'd corner people, sharing his version of our family history. Always the same story, the loving father desperately trying to save his mentally unwell son. But Lila had found her strength. The deeper she saw the truth, the braver she became. She stopped playing along. She started pushing back, calling out their lies in real time, refusing to be a pawn. That shift enraged them. They'd relied on her silence. Their messages turned vicious, threatening to destroy both our lives if she didn't return to being their obedient daughter. The financial records revealed one last devastating detail. This hadn't been reactive, it was premeditated. Our parents had been planning this for years. They tracked my income growth, kept notes on my career milestones, and calculated how much they could take without provoking too much suspicion. Every dollar I earned was treated like theirs, strategically extracted over time. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was surgical, intentional. My mother's final desperate move was her boldest yet. She contacted my biggest client directly and booked a meeting under a false name. She arrived at their office in business attire, polite and composed. She claimed she was just a concerned mother wanting to ensure her son was mentally fit to handle the demands of the project. When that failed, she switched to tears, telling them she'd been abandoned, that she feared for my well-being. But my client, a brilliant entrepreneur who'd built her company from the ground up, saw through it in seconds. Not only did she refuse to cut ties with me, she later pulled me aside and shared her own story of escaping a toxic family. She told me I wasn't alone.
Her support meant more than she probably realized. It validated what I'd been clinging to in my darkest moments. That it was possible to succeed even when your own family worked relentlessly to tear you down. As winter closed in, the weight of the daily harassment became unbearable. Leela and I were running on fumes, drained from always looking over our shoulders, exhausted from documenting every incident, mentally worn down from the constant psychological warfare. But something had shifted. We were no longer reacting from fear or guilt. We understood now. Our parents had fully revealed who they were. There was no ambiguity left, no excuses to be made, and there was no going back. Then, one morning, everything changed. While organizing the ever-growing inheritance folder, I found something odd buried in the inheritance documents. A folded piece of paper, handwritten in our grandmother's shaky cursive. It was addressed to Leela and me. She'd written about her fears that our parents might misuse the inheritance and expressed her hope that someday we'd find the truth. She even included contact information for her estate lawyer, someone our parents had insisted had died years ago. I dialed the number immediately. To my surprise, the lawyer was very much alive and relieved to hear from us. He told me he'd been trying to reach us for years, but all his attempts had been intercepted. Our parents had ensured every piece of mail and message disappeared before it reached us. That afternoon, we met with him in person. What he revealed made our stomachs turn. Not only had our parents hidden a significant portion of the inheritance, but they'd forged our signatures on legal documents, claiming we'd willingly declined our shares. The fraud was extensive, serious enough to open the door to criminal charges. Leela sat beside me, stunned, as the lawyer laid out our options. We could reclaim what was rightfully ours, but it would mean confronting our parents with undeniable evidence of their crimes. The idea of taking legal action against them, even after everything, was overwhelming. The emotional weight was heavier than we expected. That evening, our mother made her most theatrical play yet. She arrived at my apartment in an actual ambulance. She had somehow convinced the paramedics to transport her, claiming unbearable chest pains. They wheeled her into the lobby on a stretcher, as she moaned and sobbed dramatically. But when she spotted Leela and me watching from the elevator, she sat up to wave and gesture at us, only to suddenly remember she was supposed to be dying and quickly slumped back. The paramedics exchanged tired, knowing looks. One of them pulled me aside. "This is the 4th time we've responded to her this month. We're keeping records. You might want to speak to our supervisor." He handed me a card. "We're starting to document this for potential abuse of service violations." My father's behavior took a darker turn when he found out about the lawyer. He began calling incessantly, hour after hour, leaving voicemails that swung wildly between threats and pleading. When we ignored him, he shifted his focus to Leela's university, calling her professors to claim repeated family emergencies in an attempt to locate her during class hours. The disruption finally reached a tipping point. The university's administration stepped in after multiple faculty members raised concerns. They enacted a protocol to block all parental contact. Leela's professors were given specific instructions, and the dean personally reassured her that her academic future wouldn't be harmed by our parents' harassment. Through it all, Talia's parents remained unwavering. During particularly hard weeks, they offered their guest room to Leela, giving her space to breathe when the apartment felt suffocating. Her mother, a retired teacher, helped her prep for finals, gently guiding her through the material when her mind was clouded by stress. Her father, who'd built his business from the ground up, sat down with me and walked me through ways to fortify my own, everything from legal protections to PR strategies for dealing with the kind of sabotage I'd been facing. Then, the private investigator, yes, the one our mother had originally hired to dig up dirt, reached out again. He'd continued the investigation on his own, driven by a growing unease about what he had seen. This time, he brought audio recordings. One featured my mother coaching my father on how to manipulate us, laying out psychological tactics, debating which triggers worked best on each of us. In another, she laughed openly about her fake medical emergencies, rating her performances and brainstorming even more dramatic scenarios for the future. It was chilling. And yet, it was exactly what we needed.
My business finally began to recover as the truth spread. Clients who had once pulled away started reaching out again. Several who had been contacted by my parents told me their stories about narcissistic relatives, family betrayal, and breaking the cycle. One longtime client even increased their contract, saying they wanted to support someone who understood how to overcome toxic family dynamics.
Ironically, the attempted sabotage ended up strengthening some of my professional relationships. Colleagues and clients who initially pulled away returned with renewed respect once the truth surfaced. A few even told me they admired my ability to remain composed under such relentless pressure. Leela's transformation was just as profound. She found her voice in a way I hadn't seen before. She started enforcing boundaries, blocking our parents during study hours, refusing to respond to emotional bait, and calmly confronting extended relatives sent as messengers. When distant cousins reached out, clearly repeating our parents' talking points, Leela responded with evidence, texts, emails, documents. Several of them switched sides almost instantly. The inheritance lawyer proved invaluable beyond the estate. He warned us that our parents had begun preparing paperwork to gain power of attorney over both of us, citing fabricated mental health concerns. They had even gone as far as forging medical documentation to support their claims. With his help, we filed legal protective orders to block any attempts to claim authority over our lives. Meanwhile, our mother's public performances descended further into absurdity. She began triggering her medical alert bracelet in stores when she imagined she'd seen us, whether we were there or not. Business owners around town started recognizing the pattern. One morning, a coffee shop manager called to give me a heads up. She was stationed outside, waiting to stage a scene during my usual visit. The evidence collection had grown into 3 full binders. Leela had taken the lead in organizing it all, mapping out a chronological timeline of events. The abuse, the manipulation, the financial schemes. It was all there, undeniable. Every crisis lined up perfectly with extravagant purchases. Every health scare seemed tailored to interrupt our independence. The pattern painted a clear portrait of deliberate, calculated control. Then they made a fatal mistake. They tried to access my business bank accounts. Using just enough of my personal information, gleaned from years of surveillance, they attempted password resets. Thankfully, the bank security protocols flagged the activity. Their fraud department contacted me right away, and I learned that similar attempts had been made at multiple institutions under my name. Meanwhile, as our story circulated through the family, more people began coming forward. Our cousin Mariana, who had always been close to our parents, called us in tears. She had just discovered they'd lied to her about her own mother's health. For over a year, she'd been sending monthly payments for what she believed were urgent medical treatments. But our aunt was completely fine. No illness, no surgeries, just another fabricated crisis. The deception stretched far wider than we'd realized. My father's professional life also began to unravel. Clients at the auto repair shop started whispering. Some had seen the harassment firsthand or had heard about it through others. Several longtime customers quietly took their business elsewhere, unwilling to support a man who stalked his own children. For the first time, the financial stress they always claimed to suffer became real, but now it was entirely self-inflicted. Then we uncovered something even more disturbing. Leela found tracking software hidden on several devices our parents had given us over the years. An old laptop, a tablet they'd insisted we use for family calls, even the smartwatch they'd gifted me for graduation. We spent an entire afternoon physically dismantling and disposing of the devices. The realization that they had been monitoring us, possibly for years, was deeply unsettling. My therapist helped me tangle it all. She explained how our parents had created a trauma bond through intermittent reinforcement, alternating between affection and cruelty to keep us constantly off balance. Understanding that dynamic gave us a sense of power. We began spotting the patterns faster, cutting them off at the root. Then came my mother's final public stunt, and it blew up in her face. She collapsed in the middle of a crowded shopping center, screaming that I'd pushed her. But security footage showed her carefully positioning herself near a display, glancing around to ensure there were witnesses, then slowly lowering herself to the floor. When Security Center confronted her with the footage, she fled, leaving behind her medical alert bracelet in her haste. But nothing could have prepared us for what happened next. I was at the bank, closing down accounts our parents had tried to access when they walked in. They clearly hadn't expected to see me. Their expressions were pure shock, genuine for once.
They turned to leave, but I had already alerted security ahead of time to flag their presence. In the manager's office, with staff and security present, I laid out the evidence, everything we had compiled: forged signatures, hidden accounts, fraudulent inheritance documents, attempted identity theft. It was the moment their masks finally shattered.
My father exploded with rage about ungrateful children, while my mother spiraled between feigned medical symptoms and venomous threats. The bank manager promptly called the police. Leela arrived just as officers began questioning them. She stood tall, no longer the intimidated girl they had manipulated for so long. When our mother turned to her with tears and clutched her chest, claiming to be in the middle of an episode, Leela calmly told the officer this is her usual tactic. The officer, who'd responded to several of her bogus emergency calls before, gave a knowing nod. Given the depth of evidence, our parents faced multiple charges: fraud, identity theft, harassment. The prosecutor, reviewing the documentation we'd compiled, was visibly stunned by the extent of their criminal behavior. Recognizing the complexity of the family dynamics, they offered us input on the potential charges. Leela and I made a difficult choice. As much as we had every right to pursue the maximum penalties, we couldn't bring ourselves to send them to prison. Instead, we agreed to a plea deal: probation, mandatory psychological counseling, and a full restraining order. They were ordered to repay the stolen inheritance and were legally barred from any contact with us. The final confrontation happened just outside the courthouse. Our parents approached, flanked by their attorney. For once, my mother wasn't putting on a performance. She looked genuinely hollow. My father's rage had burned out into something empty. They started to speak, but their lawyers stopped them, reminding them of the no-contact order. As they turned away, I felt a wave of unexpected grief, not for who they were, but for who we had once wished they could be. Talia squeezed my hand. Leela stood beside me, and in that moment, I understood we had created our own family, one built on honesty, mutual respect, and actual love, not manipulation or obligation. We used part of the recovered inheritance to fund therapy for both Leela and me, and to pay off debts our parents had racked up in our names. The rest we used to build financial stability, something they'd always dangled just out of reach. Leela applied to graduate school, finally free of their grip. I expanded my business, no longer derailed by sudden smear campaigns or sabotage. 6 months later, life had found a new rhythm. The nightmares faded, though every now and then we both still paused when our phones buzzed with an unknown number. But we'd learned to recognize the triggers, and we were learning to let go. Talia and I grew even closer, no longer forced to constantly defend our relationship. Our extended family began to see the truth more clearly. Some ties were repaired, others remained frayed or permanently broken. But those who had also been manipulated found their voices too. Our cousins and aunts formed a quiet but powerful support network. We listened, shared, and helped each other heal. Sometimes I wondered whether our parents had gained any insight through the mandated counseling, but I no longer felt responsible for their growth. My focus was on the life I was building, a life where family was chosen, a life grounded in trust, not control. When Leela graduated with honors, the celebration was simple, joyful, and real. There were no staged emergencies, no guilt trips or drama, just pride and presence. I watched her walk across the stage and remembered my own graduation, ruined by our parents' theatrics. This time, it was different. This time, we got to be proud of each other. The business thrived. Without constant sabotage, my work spoke for itself. Clients appreciated the designs, the professionalism, and me. I hired a team, scaled sustainably, and turned the graphic design firm into everything I had once dreamed it could be when I left the finance world behind. One evening over dinner with Talia's family, I looked over at Leela. She was laughing, confident, discussing her graduate program without a trace of fear. No longer the anxious, hyper-vigilant version of herself, just a young woman in control of her future. We had survived a relentless campaign of control and deceit,
And we had won. The scars were still there, but they no longer told the whole story. They were just part of it now, woven into a life we chose to write on our own terms.